And then what I'll do here is I'll get me highlighted, if I can figure out what I'm doing here. Well, spotlight me so you can see what's going on. Okay. So this is Nation's green sedge, and named after Bill Nation. He was doing flies for BC for quite a while. So this is a sedge pattern. It's a wet fly, pretty basic wet fly. The tail is this stuff, which is duck quill. The body is pseudo seal or seal dubbing. This is actually real seal dubbing. Rib is a little bit of oval gold tinsel. And the collar is a soft hackle. It's basically these guys here. And then the wing is Mallard flank. So it's pretty basic materials. So we'll get the hook in the vise. I've already debarbed this puppy. Now, to get the tail to stand up properly, I'm using black 8/0 thread. And I'm going to start it at the front. And I'm just going to coat the shank of the hook a little bit, because I'm going to be spinning some seal dubbing up here, and I don't want it to twist around too much. Same thing with the next fly, as a matter of fact. So what I want to do here is I want to create a base for where I'm going to tie this little bit of tail in. And I'll put it just a little bump right where the hook barb is. And that's going to help the tail stand up a bit. Get my thread just in front of that bump. Now what I've done is I've cut some small slips off this long side of this duck quill. And because it has they have a tendency to separate when you're trying to tie them in, I've put a little glue on them to try and hold the feathers together while I'm trying to tie them in. So this is the slip that I cut out of there. And it's got a nice little shape to it. I will measure this duck quill so that it extends at least a shank length past the bend of the hook. It's a prominent feature. So I'll place it on the hook, thumb and forefinger where my thread is hanging. I'll bring the thread up in between my thumb and forefinger and tuck it back in. Down the far side, tuck it in, bring it back up, tuck it in, and then I will attach it to the hook shank by pulling up. That will keep the feather on top of the hook shank without separating. Now that I've got that bound down, I'm going to come back to where it's tied in. I will lift it up and put a thread wrap underneath the tail and then a wrap in front. And that will hold that tail up and keep it fairly solid facing up. Next thing we'll do is we'll take some oval tinsel and attach it to the hook shank, basically partway down. I don't mind having a bit of a bulk to the body here. So I'm going to tie it on there, and I'll put it down the hook shank, and I'll stop it right where that tail is. And let it hang there for the moment. Then I need to put dubbing on the hook. So I take my dubbing wax and I'm just going to touch a little bit on my thread there to let it grab. This seal dubbing is quite hard to get to adhere to the thread sometimes because it's quite coarse and it doesn't have a lot of little strands that get on there quite easily. And it's going to take a while as with the second fly as well, because you don't want to put too much dubbing on at once. It makes it difficult if you put too much dubbing on in big clumps. It makes it difficult to form a nice little tight rope of dubbing that allows you to control a nice even shape to the body of the fly when you're twisting the dubbing on. If you put too much on, you just end up with great big chunks of dubbing that make bumps in the body. So taking your time to squeeze that every once in a while, I need a little more wax, because this seal fur has a tendency not to adhere to the thread. It's quite coarse. So I'll get a bit of a dubbing rope here, and I'll try to make it relatively even in diameter all the way down the thread. So it's sort of like 4 times thread diameter, the rope. That makes it a little easier. So I will wrap right in front of the red tail, and I will make a dubbing rope that's about 3 times the shank of the hook diameter. And this, like I say, to do this properly, it takes a little bit of time and adjustments to the diameter of that body. I want it reasonably fuzzy, so I don't want to tighten the dubbing up too much. I want the rib to kind of sink into the dubbing when I wrap it forward. And I will wrap this all the way up the shank of the hook. Pinch of dubbing. Wax. And doing it this way in little bits at a time really makes it a lot easier to control the evenness of the body of the fly. You'll see that even more so when I'm doing the next one. Because the next one, the body is quite a bit bigger and longer. And I'm going to stop this dubbed body a bit shy of where the eye is. So pretty much there. Then I'll take my oval tinsel, and I already see that stupid tail split on me. Oh, well, oh, well. And I will counter wrap that up the body of the fly in 3 or 4 nice even turns. Off. And I'm going to leave a good 2 to 3 eye widths behind the eye of the hook there, because the collar and the wing will take up some space. So for the collar, I have some of these guys, which are out of a pheasant peacock, even on pheasant, I should say, or actually a bit of a hen hackle. Actually, it works pretty good on them. But what I'm trying to do is find one out of this little package here that's not too broad a hackle. I don't want this collar to be too long. So there's the feather, and I've already prepared a bunch of these so that you can do a little production tying. And I'm going to hold it by the tip here and stroke the barbules back like so, and leave the tip exposed like that. And I'll tie this on to the shank of the hook right in front of the dubbing. Cinch it down good, couple of good wraps there. Pull the tip up, couple of good wraps in front. And that'll secure the feather. So when I'm gonna wrap it on, I can now trim the tip out. If I can get my scissors in there. There we go. Take my hackle pliers and grab it, stem up here. And then I'm going to fold the hackle. This is a standard wet fly hackling technique. Fold the hackle back on the stem like that. And then wrap it around, probably with this feather, the way it's been stripped, about 3, maybe 4 wraps. And you have to keep stroking the feathers back so they don't get all bound up underneath the previous wrap. When I get to the end of the folded hackle, I'll just come in here and trim that out. Get rid of the stem. And then I'll hold it back like that. And use a few wraps to force that collar back right up against the dubbing. And because the dubbing's reasonably fat, it'll keep that hackle splayed out. Even though I sort of pushed it back. So that's a typical wet fly thing. And the last little bit is the wing, which is mallard flank. And I prepared a bunch of mallard flanks ahead of time for tying on. And I'm going to pick one here that's a nice dark coloration to it. This guy here. And I'll do the same thing. I'll just strip some of the fuzz out of the bottom so I have a bare stem. And that's a little long, so I'll just strip a few more things off here, the sides. I want this tail to be, or this wing to be, about almost the length of the shank back to the tail. I want a fairly long wing. So just clean it off so that I've got exposed stem. Then I'll put the hackle down on top of everything, this wing down on top of everything, like that. And I'll make a light wrap or 2 over the stem of that hackle, and then grab the stem and pull it forward to the length I want. And what that does is that pulls some of the fibers into that couple of wraps and flattens out the wing as well as giving it the correct length. And then I'll give a couple of good wraps, pull the stem back, a couple of wraps there to secure it, trim it off, and then I'll give it a nice, good sized black head here. Get my hackle pliers and do a wet finish. And trim that off. And we'll take a little bit of head cement and just dab it on that head. Now to keep the eye from being all covered up with head cement, I just take my bodkin and make sure the eye is clear. There you go. So that's a nice little wet fly.
Very nice, Dave.
get it up here so you get a close up. There we go. So that's him. Now the second fly uses some of the same techniques, but it's for the adult sedge, the adult stonefly. And in the notes that I sent out, you'll see that apparently, from what I was been looking at, on the Cowichan River and maybe a few other rivers on the island, this is an early spring, an early spring caddis fly. We'll get this stuff out of the way so I'm not. I try the next one. So the next one is a emerging caddis. And that's this guy here. The generic pattern is called a Stimulator. And this is the adult stonefly. And it has deer hair tail, short deer hair tail, a dubbed body. And the rib on this one is actually a hackle. It's a brown furnace hackle. Then we put the wing on, which is deer hair as well. Some more dubbing on the front, and then a grizzly hackle at the front of that on the thorax. So that's the basic construction. It's not a whole lot different than the other one in some respects. So it doesn't have a feather tail like the last one. The tricky part with this is getting the deer hair to sit on the hook. So part of that is I'm going to get my hair stacker out. Hair stacker, because I want to try and at least get the ends of the hackle relatively even. Now for the hackle, well, let's look at the deer hair first. I have two patches of deer hair here. I have one that's bleached coastal deer hair, and it's got fairly short length fibers, and I'm going to use that for the tail. I have one of a similar color, but this one has a lot longer fibers, and I'll use that one, and they're a little more coarse deer hair, so I'm going to use that one for the wing. And then the body dubbing is some stuff I've had laying around for a long time, and these little things. It's Western Angling Arts, and it's a light gold. And if you want to do one, you can do one a little brighter in a yellow, but I'm going to do the light gold. So that's the basic fly. The hook is a Mustang 9672, which is like a 3X long wet fly hook. And it's a number 6. The thread I'm going to use is red. It adds a little brightness to the body of the fly. So what I want to do to start the thread on here is I'm going to start about 1/3 of the way back from the eye, because I'm going to I have to get a wing and a thorax in here without crowding the heck out of the eye. So I'll do the same thing as I did before to make the dubbing stick to the hook. I will wrap the thread down in not touching turns, but closely open turns. Right back to there. Turn that end off. And then finish wrapping the thread. Right down, because I want the tail of this fly to be sticking out up just a little bit. I'll take it right back to the bend, like that, and then bring it back forward there and create just a little bump. So again, similar to the last one, so that the tail will have kind of an upwards flare on it. I'll take this small patch of deer hair, and I'll find myself a part of it where the ends kind of line up nice. And I'll pinch a small chunk of deer hair on the pelt like that. get in with my scissors right up tight to the belt and trim that batch off. Now, to get this stuff to sit properly and to stack properly, I need another fly tying piece of tool, wherever it went. There it is. It's a comb. So I want to get all the loose fuzzies off the bottom. That makes it easier to stack in the stacker. And my hair stacker, I just put them in tips first. Let it down there, and then I'll whack it on my knee a few times, good and solid, so it doesn't make a heck of a noise. Slide it out. And I'll grab that stack of deer hair. And then you'll see that there's a few bits that stick out the front. And I want to even them up a bit, so I pull a few loose bits out. It's ones that stick out too far. I want the tail to be about a gap length behind the bend of the hook. So I'm going to hold it in that position on top of the hook, right on top of the hook, and pinch right where the thread is on either side of that clump. Thread up between the fingers down on the far side of the hook, and then back up between the fingers, back. And when I get them back in between, I'm going to pull up again. And I'm going to cinch it really good and solid. And I'll do a little wrap in front of that, and then use my thumb and my forefinger to guide the tips down the shank. And then get my scissors here and get rid of the bits here at the end that kind of stick out. So that I can finish off tying this stuff up. I could have done that ahead of time, just trim the butt ends, but it's just as easy to do this. There's a few stragglers that I can clip out here. Bring my thread back down and cinch this body down up against the shank of the hook. That forms the underbody and the base of the body of the fly. Now, this is where tweezers come in handy, because you end up with a lot of little bits of deer hair sticking out with this. Coastal deer hair is quite hollow, and it has a tendency to kink and stick out all over the place when you try and cinch it down. So it's easy just to take the ones that stick out at odd angles and pluck them off. There's a couple of mallards down there. I can tidy that up again later, but I want to get them out of the way when I can get at them. There we go. Okay, now once again, what we'll do is we'll go lift the tail, go underneath it, pull that wrap forward a bit, wrap in front. We'll do that one more time. Under the tail, and then wrap in front. And that makes that tail stick up a bit. It's going to get flattened down a bit more when I start doing the dubbing. Now, next thing I need is the ribbing for the back, which is a brown or a furnace hackle. And I've got one here that has about the right barbule length. So I'll just measure it up against. I wanted that back ribbing to be about, the barbules to be about gap long. So I searched through my furnace hackle and I found one that's about the size I want. And the furnace has that dark core as well as having brown barbules. And once again, what I'll do is I'll strip the fuzz off the end of the hackle and trim that off. And I'm going to take these barbules at the end and stroke them down so that they stick out to the side. And I will just trim on either side of the stem. I'll trim a few barbels off that leave a little bit of a fuzzy part attached to the stem. And what that does is that helps grab that thread, that hackle in, so that when it tied down the point, it's not going to pull loose as easily. And then I'll take the stem and tie it on the near side of the hook. Come on. Every once in a while, I've got to spin my bobbin to get the thread to fall the right way. And tie that in right there. Use my material clip to hold that hackle out of the way. So now I want to dub a body with the same as I did with the previous fly. Get my thread back to the back. And I'll use dubbing wax again. Just touch it on the thread. A little bit on my end of my forefinger. And take this, this fine dubbing out of here in little bits at a time and attach that to the thread by twisting it on. And again, use small amounts. You don't want a big chunky rope, because it allows you, by going back and forth with a thin rope, it allows you to build a nice compact, or compacted, I guess you could say, skinny body that allows you to size it and taper it the way you want. So it takes a bit of time to do, but at the end of the day, if you take the time to do it right, you end up with a much more even body that is dense enough that you can tie your hackle into it as a rib without compressing the dubbing. Slide that right up. And now we'll start right there in front of where the hackle is. And you can see I'm going to be able to build a body. I'm just going to skinny that out a bit and go one more wrap back and then forward, just to get the body diameter that I want. And I need to go a little ways up the thread here. So this will take a few minutes. But if you're patient, you can get a fairly nice body out of it. Just means using smaller bits of dubbing and taking your time getting them on there. And squeezing it pretty good onto the thread so that it doesn't splay out when you're trying to wrap. Now, I think the reason that the recipe includes red thread is it adds a little bit of a reddish overtone to the body of the fly. So it's not just a single color of dubbing that goes all the way up the thread, all the way up the body. Just adds a little bit of red highlight on things. Oop, that was too fat. And when I get up to that 2/3 point, I'll finish the dub body. Don't put that away because I'm going to need it for the next part. Take my hackle and I will wrap a nice spiral hackle, probably counter wrap it, just like I did the last one. And you can see one of the things that when you wrap, if you are careful, you can get a nice even wrap up the body of the fly. And you see how that furnace gives a dark rib all the way up the fly. The center of that furnace echo does a really nice job of that. When I get to there, I'll tie it off. That right down to there. Okay, now I'm going to put a little bit of a thread base here up to a little shy of the eye, back, and then back in front of the dove body. And this is where I'm going to put the wing in. So now what I need is this other patch of fur that has longer deer hair so that I can have a longer wing. And I'll pick out as much as I think I need. If I get a little extra, I can always pick a few out. And I'll do the same thing. I'll pull it out at right angles to the patch of that it's on. Come in nice and tight to the skin and trim it. And you can see those tips are nowhere near even because
I'm doing this on the phone.
And I will.
This is being done on the phone.
Okay, so now what we'll do is we will stack this again. I will put those ends in.
No, I cannot.
I'm gonna whack my leg again pretty good. Make sure all those ends are stacked together. Take that out of the stacker, and I'll pull a couple of these really long ones that stick out with my fingers, and then take the comb and just make sure I got the fuzz gone. And measure where I want to put this wing. And I want the wing to be just a hair shy of where the tail is. And I've got enough there. I probably don't need any more thickness to that. I'll do the same thing as I did before. I will pinch on top of the hook, thread up between, down the far side, up between, and then just pull straight up. And the whole purpose of that is to use your fingers to try and keep that hair clump on top of the hook shank. When I get a couple of good wraps in there, you see how that hair flared a bit? That means it's on there pretty good. Pull the butt ends up, lay my scissors along the eye of the hook, and trim that butt ends off. And once again, I'll get these guys here. I got to trim them up here a bit more. Having these curved scissors helps because sometimes you can get in places simply by turning the scissors over. Now, one of the things that happens when you put this deer hair on, it has a tendency to wrap around the shank when you tie it down, even though you use that pinch technique. And before I do the final cinch, I will take my fingernail in my finger of my right hand, and I'll try and roll that patch of hair over a bit so it's right on top of the hook shank. Then I'll cinch this down really good. And to make that wing stand up, I'll do the same thing I did with the tail, is I'll take the wing and lift it at the back like that. Lift it up, wrap in behind it, and pull forward. Wrap in front. One more wrap behind. bring it in front and cinch down. Now the thorax in this fly is going to be thicker than the body, so that's okay. That's why it's okay to leave the butt ends at the very front. And then that little bit of wrap in behind causes the wing to stand up. Okay, now we're gonna, before we start dubbing, I'm gonna attach the front hackle, which is a Grizzly hackle. And I've got one that I only need like 3 wraps here. So I'll strip forward on the forward part of the hackle with the stem. And do the same thing as I did with the brown one, the furnace one. I'll just leave a bit of stem out the front, and I'll trim either side of the stem to leave a few barbules sticking out, so that when I tie it in, it grabs onto that feather and it won't pull out. On the near side of the hook, I'll cinch that in and let that wing lay back over top of that deer hair wing. Back with the dubbing wax and my nice little bit of dubbing, and I don't need a whole lot here. Again, I can use a little bit at a time, and I want to build just a little bit.
The password error,
a little bit thicker.
it's corrected. It's has corrected. Error message.
Somebody's got audio leaking through as they speak on their phone.
Has changed.
You might want to mute your audio.
You should do that. You should do that,
Dave.
I
will.
I don't know who it is.
Yeah, he's muted himself now.
Yeah, I don't know who it is. I'm trying to dub at the same time. All right, so I've got some dubbing on there. And what I want to do is, again, try to make a bulky thorax, more bulky than the back, and try to make it reasonably even. I could use just a hair more, but a really thin rope just to even things out. There we go, that should do it. There we are. Teeny bit more. So this is the time-consuming part of this fly, is getting the dubbing on, because it's all a dubbed body. You can probably get by using yarn, but that's not what the recipe that I was looking at called for. So last thing we do is we wrap our Grizzly hackle, and we'll get maybe 3, at most 4 wraps there. Tie it off. That. And the hackle clear. And then use my thumb and forefinger to pull from back from the head. And I will wrap a nice bright red head here. A good solid head. I think that's part of the pattern's appeal. It has these little bits of red sneaking through. Whip finish. And get the glue. get in here and get kind of enough glue on there to get a bit of a glossy head. And use my bodkin to fill the eye out. There we go. And that's it. That's the stimulator. And I'll go back in here and
Nice and buggy looking.
yeah, on spotlight. If I can figure out how to do this. Come on. Still have to play around with this interface. Okay, I can remove spotlight. There we go.
This is also a good grasshopper pattern.
Yeah, yeah. And again, for here, the intent is to give it a early season sedge or stonefly emerger or adult.
Late June in the interior at dusk, they're dynamite.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, they're just wonderful.
yeah. I've used stimulators on the bow and the crow and on some of the eastern slopes streams in Alberta, and the right time of the year, if the caddis are out, it can give you a whole whack of very striking strikes, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah.
Dave, you can
Yeah.
turn the recording off.
Will do. I just gotta figure out what I've done here with the participants for some reason. There we go. There we go.